Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Congressman Mark Takai. He is first congressional district. He'd been in Washington now 100 days, and now he has spent some time with us. Thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks.
Great
Thanks
to see you.
Thanks. It's great to be home.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you know what's interesting? It's reminiscent of a show that you and I did last summer. I think it was. Remember, same deal, same table.
Yeah.
And now you're victorious and serving in 100 days, and you're back. It's really it's wonderful to look at it from both ends that way.
Right. Yeah, it's great to be back here. I mean, I think I've been here maybe a couple times before, and it's getting better and better.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
You too.
Thank you.
So, I mean, the whole thing is we're styling this show as one of our Community Matters series. Community Matters because it does. And the title of our show is Mr. Takai Goes to Washington. Reminiscent of a movie with, who was it, Jimmy Stewart years ago. Anyway, so I guess the first question I'm really sincerely curious about this is how has it been? How was your entry? You've been in Hawaii politics since 1994.
Right.
That's a long time, and you're a veteran in Hawaii politics. But here you go to Washington. What was it like to enter that world?
Well, first of all, it was, from my perspective, very overwhelming. It was very humbling, having the opportunity to serve Hawaii in Congress was something that I never imagined, even maybe a couple years ago. But the planets aligned and people came together, and we're very fortunate now to be in Congress. I've said this to many people over the past 4 months, but it's being in Congress gives me the opportunity to kind of reflect back. I've been to DC so many times prior, but to actually walk through the halls of Congress, walk through the Capitol, especially at night, when there's no one else around, and being able to reflect on all the people that have come before me is truly remarkable. We have only 4 members of our congressional delegation, Senator Schatz and Senator Hirono on the Senate side, and Congresswoman Gabbard and myself on the House side. But I think we're working extremely well together, and I think we're a formidable delegation. So, it's humbling, yet it's work. There's a lot of work to do, especially for our state, especially for the future in our keiki.
Yeah, so how do you spend your day down there in those halls?
Yeah, we work during the week, and typically I have an opportunity to come home on the weekends. So I've been traveling quite often. In fact, I think back and forth, yeah. This particular trip, we have a district work week that started today. I'll be able to stay in Hawaii for the whole week, which is great. But usually Monday through Friday or Tuesday through Friday, depending on the week, it's pretty intense. We're on the floor maybe 3 times a week, 3 times a day voting. There are numerous committee hearings. And then naturally there's tons of people coming from Hawaii, so there's always a chance to sit down and talk story with people from home. But the days are long. We start typically at about 8, and I don't get home till about 10.
Oh. So what's your office like? Is it nice?
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, you got to. Everybody's got to come to the Capitol, and when they have an opportunity, they should stop by. We were fortunate to get Canon 422 as our room, and it all works by luck. You stick your hand into this box and you pull out this little number.
Really? How interesting. Oh.
And we were number 15 out of 58. So we were able to choose a pretty nice office. We are facing east on the 4th floor. Facing east, that means we're facing the outside of the building. We see the Library of Congress outside, but it's just beautiful. Yeah. The office is pretty spacious too. The ceilings are pretty high, so it's a really nice office. But we have a great staff on board, both here in Hawaii and also in Washington, D.C.
You have an office here in the federal building?
Absolutely, right.
And then one in your office in Washington.
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned coming out of the legislature after being in for 20 years is in the legislature, we're fortunate enough to have one full-time staff member during the entire year, and then during the session, it's another, we can pick up another three people. So maybe about 4 people in the office. I have 14 people full-time in Hawaii and DC combined. And, you know, you're only as good as your staff, and definitely can't do much without them. So I learned very early on that it's important to rely on staff, and we have a great team, both here in Hawaii and in DC. In fact, we put together a staff with Rod Tanonaka as our chief of staff and Sean Callahan as our deputy. Rod is here in Hawaii, Sean is in DC. Both of them come by way of Colleen Hanabusa's office. So we transitioned from Colleen's tenure in Congress.
Oh, they were with her.
To me being in, and along came maybe six or seven people from Congresswoman Hanabusa.
So they can show you a few things and help ease the entry.
Right. So I mean, there's so many lessons to be learned. The best lesson, I think, was, and this is through experience in the legislature. You talk to people and you hear what they say. So one of the biggest lessons that many people said is just, you know, make sure that you have a staff that can hit the ground running, that has experience, and we built our staff like that.
So, is it like that movie with Kevin Spacey?
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember the name.
House of Cards.
House of Cards. Is it like that? Do you ever feel there are parallels there?
No. It's not even close. Okay. In fact, I offended Steny Hoyer by introducing him as the whip. He came to Hawaii and supported us just a few weeks ago. And I told everybody, you know, he's the majority whip. Very important person. Kind of like the guy on House of Cards last season. He's like, Mark, I'm not like that guy. Yeah, it's, you know, the setting's the same. I think some of the issues they follow are appropriate and contemporary issues that we're dealing with. But the craziness and the undermining and it's well, at least I don't see it, you know. Yeah. You know, what's interesting is the media shows Congress as pretty dysfunctional over the years, and even this year. And I think we sort of, on the Democrat side and the Republican side, message to the media like that. But, you know, I found members of Congress, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side, to be very nice people. And surprisingly, maybe to some, you know, we're having great conversations. In fact, the delegation from Alaska, which for many years has been very important to Hawaii, is still important to us. And, you know, we got together for dinner about a month ago, and we plan to do it every 3 months. They're all Republican. But it was a great dinner, and we had a great opportunity to break bread and to talk story. And it happens like that every single day. You know, sure, we have our differences. You know, we on the Democratic side tend to focus on the middle class and bringing people up. The Republicans, I think, in general, tend to look at supporting big business and what some people call trickle down. But for the most part, you know, everybody wants to make sure that the United States, our country, moves forward. And we've done some great stuff. You know, you may not have heard too much, but we avoided a shutdown of government with Homeland Security, which was great. Every single member of the Democratic House minority voted in favor of it, along with the Speaker and a few of his people. The other more recent example is the doc fix. It's been something that's been debated and discussed for almost 20 years, 17 years to be exact, and we fixed it.
What is this?
The doc fix. It addresses the amount of money doctors are being paid for their services in Medicare. Mm-hmm. And it also provided funding for CHIP, Children's Health Program, insurance program. Also provided funding for the community hospitals. We passed it. Both Speaker Boehner and Leader Pelosi came together in a bipartisan fashion, crafted this measure. passed with almost 400 votes in the House and I think 95 votes in the Senate. Pretty incredible. But the media doesn't pick up that stuff.
Now they're looking for raw meat.
Yeah, they're looking for battles and fights.
Yeah. So, you know, but you were involved in state policy, many, education for one, I remember. You were chair of the education committee.
Right. Higher Education Committee.
Higher education, right. Now you're, you know, in Congress and the issues are different. The whole orientation is different. So what's the transition like? I mean, they give you a little book?
No. You know, I didn't know this, my staff did, but if we won, which we did in November, we'd get a call like immediately, and within 5 days we'd be flying to DC. So we did that. On Sunday, we started moving to DC, and we had about 2 weeks of orientation. Ironically, we got put together with every member of the freshman class for the orientation for this evening reception, and then we didn't see the Republicans to the last day in a briefing on ethics. So they kept us separately and kept us separate, and I think it was intentional on both, you know, the majority and the minority side. But over time, you know, we've been able to build relationships, especially among the freshmen. 58 is a pretty sizable class. The prior class with Tulsi Gabbard in it had, I think, about 100 members. So that was a pretty big class as well. So, you know, we've been working together. But, yeah, I think by design, especially some of the older people, and I don't know why this is, but, you know, there's an effort to separate at the beginning. But, you know,
So is the reason to avoid argument, or?
Well, I think there's just a lot to learn, you know, in orientation, and I think
they want to have the first whack at you.
The learning is a little different, I guess, for the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yeah.
You know, I think there not only are there procedures and processes to learn, you know, simple stuff about where to walk, how to get to the Capitol, and how to vote, but there's also some substantial policy issues and you know, just things that Democrats talk about more than Republicans and vice versa. So that was the start, and that was in November. But over time, it's worked out. You know, as I said before, it's very important for people like me to rely on staff, and I have. But you know, you mentioned that it's very different from the legislature, and I would say that it's not. You know, my priorities in the legislature were education, military and veterans, sustainability, as we talked about in the past, and then as a catch-all, you know, the equality issues, the women's issues, you know, Kapuna issues, and focusing on equal rights for all. Those were my top priorities in the legislature, and they continue to be my top priorities in Congress. You know, defense is a big deal for Hawaii. And what drives defense is federal spending and support from Congress and from the Pentagon, and we play a role in that.
Yeah. It sounds like even in 100 days, you can begin to imagine yourself, see yourself in a special, you know, sort of develop the persona for you as a congressman, how it's going to be for you through hopefully a career of being a congressman, what you will stand for, what you will be advocating, what you will care about. Sounds like it's already there.
Well, it's been there, you know, for 20 years. I've had a lot of practice in the legislature. I shouldn't say that, but, you know, in the legislature, I made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and I think the challenge is learning from those mistakes and making sure that it don't happen again. And I have an opportunity now to start again, you know. It's not 1994 anymore, you know, it's 2015, but I'm a freshman once again, and there are things that occurred 20 years ago in the legislature that I'm going to make sure don't occur as a member of Congress, and it's been great, you know. I have it's been a lot. It's been a lot of fun.
It sounds like it's all good preparation, and you'd much rather have this background than not have this
Right.
background. You'd be
Right.
much better prepared. We're going to take a short break. That's Congressman Mark Takai, 1st Congressional District, here on Community Matters, because it does. And then the title of our show is Mr. Takai Goes to Washington. We're going to find out more about the specific issues he's involved in right after this break.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island. I work in the ER there. But on Tuesday afternoons, I get to come and spend 45 minutes to an hour with Jay Fidell and the ThinkTech staff. They're terrific professionals. They help us to bring some of the leading cutting-edge topics here across our state to you. So you can join us at our show on healthcare in Hawaii to talk with leaders from across all the spectrum of health in our state, or you can join us for any other show where we talk about economic development or tourism or some really eclectic programs too. So really, we'd love to see you here on our show. Thanks for joining us and thanks for supporting us.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Congressman Mark Takai, 1st Congressional District. He's back from Washington. He's at home. We'd love to have him here with us. He's been here a number of times before. There's always a seat at this table for you,
Great, thank
Congressman.
you. Yes, appreciate that.
So, you know, we're talking about sort of shaping your persona, you know, your issues, you know, what you care about. And you know, you bring certain things to the table, you know, from being in the legislature. Also, you're a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve, is it?
National Guard.
National Guard. And that certainly gives you some background in the military that you would not otherwise have. And all this suggests, I guess, to the leadership that you should be on some committees. So now you're, you know, getting placed on committees. Can you talk about that?
Oh, yes. In fact, that's a very important focus as we got in during orientation. One of the things that we learned very early on is it all starts with orientation. So I spent a lot of time talking to the leadership and being very specific on our requests and what we thought Hawaii needed. You know, fortunately for us, over the past few months, we had both Colleen Hanabusa and Tulsi Gabbard as members of the House Armed Services Committee. That's the committee that oversees the Pentagon. That's the committee that directs defense spending across the world for the United States. And as you can imagine, with the rebalance to the Pacific, the pivot to the Pacific, the focus now in the Asia-Pacific region, Hawaii is critical to that because we're headquarters, or the home to PACOM, which is the headquarters for the Pacific Command. So I requested Armed Services. And, you know, most people said, well, you know, you can't have two members of Congress from Hawaii, especially since there's only two sitting on HASC. And I said, well, but it happened before, you know, and not to mention the fact that this particular seat, the 1st Congressional District, has held a seat on the Armed Services Committee for about 30 years. So we made our arguments, and fortunately for us in Hawaii, leadership realized the importance of the military for Hawaii and awarded me a seat on the Armed Services Committee.
That's great.
So I sit along with Tulsi Gabbard as members of the Armed Services Committee. The second committee, which we just received just a few weeks ago, is a Small Business Committee. And just last week, we were awarded the ranking member of the Contracting and Workforce Subcommittee.
What does that mean, ranking member?
Yeah, so ranking member, it means more than I think people think, because actually we have a chairman for every committee. We have a chairman for every subcommittee. That chairman right now is a Republican because the Republicans are in control of the House.
That sounds like the state legislature.
Right, but what's different about the legislature is under the chair is a vice chair. Both of them are typically Democrats in Hawaii. Well, in Congress, you have the chair and you have members on the Republican side or the majority side, and you have the ranking member and members on the minority side. I sit as the ranking member of the Contracting and Workforce Subcommittee on the Small Business Committee. That means that I am the leading Democrat, and I will be sitting right next to the chair during our hearings. But more importantly for Hawaii.
That is important for Hawaii, that particular subcommittee.
That committee is very important.
Yeah.
Because not only does it have jurisdiction over the Small Business Administration, our particular subcommittee has jurisdiction in all the programs that the SBA runs as it relates to small business, like women-owned, service disabled, the 8A program, the Native Hawaiian program that's run out of small business, all comes under the jurisdiction of that particular subcommittee. So it's going to be great. You know, I think it's important to note that over 80% of the businesses here in Hawaii are small, considered small businesses by federal definition, and it's going to be important. You know, I've said it during the campaign, and I continue to say it, that small business is a driver of our economy here in Hawaii and across the nation. So, very excited.
Well, it sounds like a process, may take a while. I'd be interested in your thoughts about it, to replenish the supply we had with Dan and Owe there.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of money coming in, billions or maybe hundreds of millions, a lot of money every year. And we don't have that yet, but it sounds like we're on the way, and the delegation is very focused on getting back to where we were.
Well, yeah, let me give you one example. We talked about armed services or defense spending, and we just passed the bill. It was almost 19 hours last week, Wednesday. It ended Thursday morning at 4:35.
19 hours straight?
Well, we had the Prime Minister Abe's speech, and we had a couple of vote series. But we started at 8 and didn't finish at 4:35. So that was long. Or I'm sorry, we started at 9 and didn't finish till 4:35. But, you know, prior to going in, people were saying that Hawaii is expected to gain about $250 million in defense or military construction. We were able to boost that to almost $500 million. In addition to that, we were able to get a number of amendments into the bill, and they're very important amendments for Hawaii. You know, we added a provision on the coconut rhinoceros beetle, that beetle that's been boring into our palm trees, our coconut trees. We added additional funding for barking sands in Kauai.
I saw that. 30 million, was it?
15 million, I believe.
15 million.
We added a provision in the legislation that forces the Navy to be more proactive and to get back to us on the Red Hill fuel tanks.
This is very important because there's a water supply issue there.
Right.
We've had a couple of visits from the Department of Health about that.
And there was a recent cut in per diem rates for federal employees and for military active duty members, and we were able to turn that around. So that was one of our big accomplishments on Wednesday night, and fortunately for us, we put that amendment in front of the committee, and it passed unanimously. We had another provision or another amendment in the bill, proposed amendment that went before the committee that would have stopped some of the cuts that we were facing here in Hawaii as part of the PACOM headquarters. There's a proposal by the SecDef from a few years ago to cut defense headquarters by 20%. It was very important for us to stop it, and we did through an amendment that I offered.
So how do you do that? I mean, this sounds like you can have enormous effect. How can you do that?
Well, I think if you take a look at the press advisory that we sent out afterwards, I think we put in about 27 proposals into the bill, of which we needed to defend 5 on the floor. We got all 5 passed. There's 2 more that we're working on that we'll be putting before the entire full House on the floor. But it's again, it's great staff working with people that know their job and following their guidance and working with other members and their staffs.
I'm getting the feeling, you can be modest about this, so correct me, but I'm getting the feeling that you're working very hard and you're very productive, and you know, you're doing a lot of things every day.
Well, we did very well this past week. It was a very busy week, hardly got any sleep, but you know, from the standpoint of what we needed to do for Hawaii, we did incredibly well.
Yeah.
We still got some work to do. You know, as I mentioned, this is going to go to the full House in a few days, and we've got a couple more amendments that we're going to be putting forth, and I expect those to also pass. But it's,
So if they're contested on the floor, or if they come up on the floor, I don't know, contested or not, you're the fellow that has to stand up and argue for them to the entire House of Representatives.
Right. I argued in front of the entire House in support of a motion to recommit. It was an EPA bill. Unfortunately, I lost that motion. I think every motion, Democratic motion to recommit, has died. But the point here is that in front of the entire House, leadership gave me the opportunity to argue that point, and I did it. This is going to be a lot different because there's going to be a whole slew of amendments being offered, and each one gets argued and defended or fought against, depending on which side you're on. But even before that, you've got to pass the Rules Committee, which is a challenge in and of itself. And you know, we go before the Rules Committee, I think as early as Monday or Tuesday, probably Tuesday next week when we get back.
It's still a sausage machine. I suppose people come, your colleagues come to you and say, Mark, I like this, or I don't like that. I'll vote for you, with you on this, but not that. I mean, does that kind of thing happen?
You know, it's, there's a lot of similarities to the legislature, clearly. You know, everything runs with bills and has to pass both houses. But you know what's fascinating about Congress? Unlike the legislature, where you have 3 readings and you have hearings, and many times people from the public are allowed to testify, and in the legislature, there's no time limit, so you can go on and on. In Congress, you can only speak before a committee if invited, right? And in some cases, bills get reported onto the floor without going through committee.
Who decides that?
It's the leadership and the Rules Committee, as I mentioned earlier. The Rules Committee is a very powerful committee working with the leadership, determines what gets onto the floor. So you have a bill, for example, the first day of the session, we passed a veterans job bill, and no hearings, nothing through any of the committees, went straight to the floor, and my very first vote on a bill was for that particular bill. It eventually went to the Senate and got signed by the president, but my point here is that no public hearings, no public debate, no committee hearings.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a bit odd.
And in the Hawaii legislature, maybe other states too, you know, there's a deadline for submitting bills. It's in the beginning.
Yes.
And now in
There's
Congress,
no deadline.
no deadline. You could have a bill any given Monday morning.
Right, because, and by the way, the hopper, putting the bill in the hopper, I met the hopper.
It's really a hopper?
There is a hopper, yeah. So you put the bill in the hopper and it gets recorded. I introduced, I think, 4 bills so far, and we're working on a few more that I was the lead, but that's the hopper. But yeah, it's a 2-year term, and there's no 60-day January to May session. It's the entire year.
Yeah.
So, you know, most people throw in some bills at the beginning, but they'll throw in bills into the hopper all throughout the year.
Yeah, sounds like you're going to do that.
Yep. Oh yeah, we have, now that the defense bill is done, or almost done, and much of our work is done, we'll be able to focus on some of our other priorities, and we'll be introducing some additional bills.
Just one question before we go to the next break, and that is, you mentioned earlier that you know, the Republicans are running things in the House anyway, and that there had been a kind of denouement about the cliff. Okay, is the mood changing? And you mentioned there's a lot of freshmen around, which is, I think, probably a good thing. Do we have a transitional time these days? Are we at a kind of an evolution that is going to lead to better times than we've seen in the past few years in Congress?
Well, I would hope so. You know, I mean, that's probably going to take a whole hour for me to explain. But on the one hand, yes, I think we see a lot of working together. I mean, I used a couple examples already. But on the other hand, I mean, there's still some paralysis in Congress. In fact, I think Speaker Boehner is having some difficulty on his own side dealing with the Tea Party Republicans. And you see it almost every day. But we have this window that's getting smaller and smaller with the presidential elections next year, 2016, and many of the members, especially on the Senate side, now running for president, and then some of my colleagues in the House now running for Senate. You're going to see a lot of stuff happen as a result of the campaigns and the elections getting more heated. But I do believe that there is a few months, maybe we will have until the end of this year where we can do some really awesome stuff, and I'm anticipating that because I think it's important for us to be positive and to focus on getting the work done. We have seen over the last few months quite a number of bills getting passed, both the House and the Senate, getting to the president's desk more than in the past. But we've also seen some bills not make it up to the president because, you know, the president has threatened to use his veto pen, and we have enough votes in both the House and the Senate to sustain a presidential veto. So what that does, I think it forces the leadership on both the House and the Senate, Democrat and Republican, to work more closely together.
Good. Maybe we're on the verge of good times. And the aloha spirit counts, and you bring that. That's Congressman Mark Takai, 1st Congressional District here on Community Matters, because it does. And Mr. Takai goes to Washington. We'll be right back with more about his life there.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Inspired by an ancient culture, classical Chinese dance, vigorous physicality, timeless stories, 5,000 years of Chinese music and dance, Shen Yun presents authentic Chinese culture. Coming to Blaisdell Concert Hall, May 8th and 9th. Tickets at shenyun.com or call 808-792-3919.
We're back with Congressman Mark Takai, 1st Congressional District. We are honored to have him here with us on Community Matters here on ThinkTech. We're calling this show Mr. Takai Goes to Washington. So there's so much to talk about. We'll never finish, but let's hit on some of the things of interest. You were involved in the Selma March.
Yes, so, you know, not too many people realize this, but Hawaii played a significant role 50 years ago, 1965. Those of you that don't recall what happened, there was a big movement in the voter rights, civil rights issues as it related to blacks being allowed to vote. Martin Luther King was probably the leader of the effort, but alongside him there was a number of people, including John Lewis, who now sits as a congressman from Georgia, and a very good friend. You know, I've learned to love, learned to like him, learned to appreciate him, and I love him dearly. Well, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of that famous period in the nation's time, and I think along with maybe 50,000 people, we brought a delegation of maybe about 200 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the march from Selma to Montgomery. The first march was on March 8th, and they got beaten down, and in fact, John Lewis got clubbed on the head. If you watch the movie Selma, he says it's very accurate of what happened during the time 50 years ago. But it took them almost a month, and in fact, three marches, significant marches, the last one being on March 23rd, when the president got involved, called out the National Guard troops, basically told everybody that this march was going to happen. But before that, Martin Luther King called out to the nation, asked the clergy from the nation, across the nation, asked the people from across the nation to come join him. And lo and behold, that a state like Hawaii, which was only 6 years old, right, came. The Reverend Abraham Akaka, along with many others from Hawaii, came bearing lei. And if you look at the some of the very historic pictures of the final march, Martin Luther King and many others were wearing lei. So Senator Hirono and I wanted to show our appreciation to John Lewis and the others who made the march and the celebration this year possible by bringing lei. So we brought 150 lei to Selma, gave it to all of our colleagues and many others.
That's great.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Perfect.
But you know what's more special about that was not so much the Friday and Saturday, but Sunday when Peggy Wallace spoke, and
Governor's daughter.
the governor's daughter, and welcomed John Lewis home. And it was at the foot of the state capitol. And she said, you know, my father watched you guys, watched from his office, and he watched history passing by. And, you know, as a member of his family and his daughter, I just want to apologize. And I want to tell you that you're welcome now.
What a nice thought.
And yeah, it was tearjerker.
It raises some interesting points for me anyway, is that, you know, it's history, and you're involved. I mean, you were involved in history making here in Hawaii, but now it's national history, and you must, you know, walk into the Capitol on a given day and say to yourself, it's all on the record. This is the unfolding of the United States. This is the evolution of our country, and I'm involved in making policy every day.
It's pretty incredible. You know, just last week, Prime Minister Abe spoke in front of a joint session of Congress, both House and Senate. Unprecedented. The very first Prime Minister ever from Japan to do that. Now, I was able to go to Japan in late March, early April, had a chance to meet with the Prime Minister. In fact, found out that he and I come from the same prefecture.
Really?
And I was...
What prefecture is that?
Yamaguchi.
My wife is from Yamaguchi, Ken.
Really?
Oh,
Really?
okay,
Yeah. There's many people on Oahu and a ton of them on Kauai as well. But I was very fortunate to be allowed to escort the Prime Minister in for his speech. But that's historic, you know. You know, the President's State of the Union address this year I thought was his best, and I was there.
What do you think of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, you know, I was a little troubled about that speech only because, you know, after he spoke, we saw that he used it in some of his political campaigns. And we've got to be careful about that. We're not allowed to use any footage of the House session.
Oh, is that right?
Nor of congressional meetings in our campaigns.
So if you get up and argue an amendment or a bill on the floor, that's not for a campaign.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
But I have hope. You know, I've always said, if there's peace in Israel and peace in the Middle East, there'll be peace across the world. And that's another issue we're trying to deal with right now.
I want to cover that in a minute, but before that, you know, we talked about Selma and the race issue in this country.
Right.
And I mean, you know, you're from Hawaii. Everybody in Hawaii has a very sort of hands-on approach about that. We understand more than other places do. But you know, we've had Ferguson rather, and we've had
Now, most recently, Baltimore.
in Baltimore. And you know, the stats have come out, and they're staggering about the problems in these communities and how they got left behind somehow, and they're not up to you know, even a chance at middle class. It's really disturbing, and that's the real reporting going on now. And I really appreciate knowing how problematic these communities are. It's got to be an issue in Congress. What's the drift in Congress about trying to fix this?
Well, I think right now the focus is with the president and with the Justice Department, right, as it relates to these cases. But there's a broader challenge that Congress is involved in, and that is going back 50 years to Voting Rights Act. You know, we saw an erosion of the voting, especially Southern blacks recently, and there are court cases right now in the Supreme Court. We have an opportunity to fix that. In fact, I was one of the introducers of the 2015 Voter Act, led by John Lewis, and we hope to get that passed. But the other troubling aspect of our congressional framework as it relates to elections is that reapportionment across the nation, aside from states like Hawaii, have been very disproportionate and unfair. Gerrymandering and putting districts in a 100% or near 100% Democrat and keeping all the Democrats together.
That's been happening more, hasn't it?
It has been happening more and more. And when you look at the challenges that, for example, the Congressional Black Caucus faces, the Congressional Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus faces, and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus faces across the nation as it relates to reapportionment, that's our next battle. Census is going to be in 2020, and we're gearing up. It's going to be very important for us, I think, to be able to influence and make sure that reapportionments are done fairly across the nation, because if you don't have the leadership in Congress and in the Senate, House and the Senate, reflective of the population, then there are significant issues. For example, most recently, 2012 presidential election, the Democrats won the popular vote for the U.S. House, and yet we didn't have the votes to run the House. We suspect that 2016 is going to be the same. 52% of the popular votes are going to go to the Democrats. But why is it that right now we sit with more than a 30-seat disadvantage, despite the fact that we were getting the votes? I think it has to do with reapportionments. Now in Hawaii, we've been very fortunate because our framework provides for a balance. The two members from the Senate President, Minority Leader, Speaker, and the Minority Leader in the House, and then they choose the 9th member, which becomes the chair of the reapportionment committee. That's what I'd like to see across the nation, and we've got a lot of work to do there.
One last question before we close, Mark, and that is, of course, you couldn't do too much about international policy in the state legislature here, but now you can. Mm-hmm. And there are great, enormous historical challenges in the Middle East, but many places in the world. And of course, you know, you have the National Guard background, you understand the military. Do you see that as part of your persona? What do you think is going to happen? Would you have a role in that, do you think, going forward?
I think every member of Congress has a role as it relates to international relations. I'm not strong there. I've got a lot to learn. But as a member of Congress, we've been voting on numerous issues as it relates to foreign affairs and foreign policy. And I suspect that, you know, President Obama's legacy is going to be built on how well he deals with the Iran situation, how he deals with the Middle East crisis, and also on our side of the world, you know, the crisis with North Korea. Those are all foreign policy issues, and foreign affairs is a very important role that Congress plays. So, you know, I'm looking forward to learning more, but clearly that's our job, and we're going to be involved in it.
And on closing, let me ask you a question that interests me is that here you're there for 100 days, people in Hawaii rooting for you the way they rooted for you in the election. What kind of feedback are you getting? What kind of communications are you getting from home?
It's been great. You know, everywhere we go now, people are talking. I just met a woman just about an hour ago, thanking me for doing the job that I'm supposed to be doing. We see it every day. I tell people that, you know, our job is to make sure that we represent you the best. We have a great team here in Hawaii and also in Washington, D.C. If you have any issues, facing you or your family, please contact us here. Or if you're coming to Washington, D.C., you know, there's always a home in our office, so we invite you there. But that is our job, and it never ends.
I told you before, you know, that I think you're the kind of the congressman of the people, and that we speak through you. And I'm very comfortable with you being in Washington. It sounds like you're comfortable too, and we wish you well in every way, Mark.
Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me here today. Appreciate it.